You there! Whose fields are these?
They are Slaughter's fields, sir.
Slaughter's fields? Well, they will be the field of slaughter yet, or I am much mistaken.
Silent stands a monument, erect to remind and warn of the war between the states and of the lives that were torn. Men acquiesced to fight and die. Oh, how many lives, killed in body or in spirit, for war kills those who survive. The monument is a stone reminder to the men who were willing to lay down their lives for a cause they believed in and to pray for a better way. General Order Number 99 was sent, issued out of Hartford, looking for 800 men. From east of the river, volunteers were sought from August 20 to September 10 to volunteer for the cause of the Union of the States, though there was ample reason to pause to consider this request to fight, as 700,000 had already joined, and there was no end in sight. Yet men did step forward, risking all that they had. While they knew not where they were going, they knew it would be bad. They became the 26th Connecticut Volunteer Infantry Regiment. From east of the river, these men, from the farms of Woodstock and Putnam to the coast, New London, Groton, Stonington. They gathered in Norwich to form companies and elected the men that would lead them, Colonel Thomas Kingsley and the officers beneath them. 10 companies formed in Norwich and stood in the autumn dew at an encampment they called Camp Russell. It was late September, 1862. On September 25th, the men gathered in Norwich to prepare for war. They took the oath and lived as one to build esprit de corps. They spent October at Camp Russell in small wooden shacks and drilled, marched, and shouldered arms, preparing for future attacks. Friendships were made, bonds were formed, and they swore a solemn pact to watch out for one another. Friends, cousins, brothers, camaraderie did not lack. While they knew not where they were going, they knew some may not come back. For news had just arrived from Maryland, 3,000 killed in a single day, and for those souls, and for their own as well, the men of Camp Russell did pray. By the 10th of November, the men were proficient in company and regimental drill. They again took the oath that they swore in September to resign their free will, to be soldiers with the duty to kill and to be killed. Their oaths were recorded in signed rolls by a federal muster officer. When this was done, they were formally one on the 10th day of November. Yet one man that night had second thoughts about the oath that he had sworn to, and risking deserter status if caught by the light of the morn, he flew. Without this man who left his duty, the regiment again did form on the 12th day of November, and once again were sworn. They were ordered to break camp. They marched to Chelsea Harbor. As thousands lined the streets to cheer, the regiment marched and boarded the steamer Commodore to the mission that was ordered. Down the river, into the Sound, they steamed along the coast as they were New York bound, a day's journey at the most. They disembarked in Brooklyn that night and marched to a race course there, pitched a tent, and tried to sleep in the cold November air. They set up camp on the frost-hardened ground where the Centerville horses had raced. They named it after the governor, whose order sent them to this place. The men all were saddened by the first death of one of their own. Since leaving Camp Russell, most had a cough, and now they were chilled to the bone. On the 29th of November, Amos Lord of Old Lyme was the first to expire from the camp fever, one of many diseases that would take more lives than fire. Word was passed they'd soon board ship, and the men prepared to pack. While they knew not where the ship was going, they knew that it would not turn back. They boarded the ship on the 4th of December and waited 2 days at bay. While the orders were sealed as to where they were going, they knew they were on their way. On December 6, the Empire City pulled out of New York Harbor, and with 4 companies of the 25th, there were 1,200 souls aboard. For several days they steamed down the coast into southern waters, glimpsing playful porpoises and wondering about the order. Then at last, the order was revealed and spread throughout the ranks. They were going to New Orleans to join the army of General Banks. They disembarked on December 18 in Carrollton, north of the city, and pitched their tents at Camp Parapet between Lake Pontchartrain and the Mississippi. The men were under immediate attack by a regiment of mosquitoes with a deadly malarial bite, and the men who were so silently bitten would go down without a fight. By Christmas, scores would be affected and placed in the infirmary. Many men were dying at the dawn of '63. On the 3rd of January, Private Henry Smith died in the hospital at Carrollton. He served with the men in Company G, and he came from a farm in Scotland. 5 days later, another private did pass, Amos Barnes of Stonington, and 2 days after, William Church. He was a Waterford man. The 13th dawned an unlucky day. Corporal Miller and Private Minor passed away. Miller was from Ledyard, Minor from Lyme, and these losses dispirited the men for a time. Eb Clark of Lyme and George France of Sterling were the next to lose their fight. Now 8 men lost to disease in the January night.
How do we fight this enemy unseen?
The men asked, distraught.
We have lost 6 men already without even firing a shot.
The challenge belonged to the regiment's chief surgeon, Dr. Ashbel Woodward of Franklin, for it was known hygiene was essential to prevent illness, though even in the best of camps there was much sickness. Since issued arms at Camp Parapet, the men were restless to fight. Preparing daily in the heat and the wet, they drilled and marched from day to night.
To wait here dying is folly. We have men and weapons as well.
Show us the rebels. We'll give them hot lead and cold steel and send them all to hell.
Yet the battle was still months away, unknown to them all. While they knew not where the battle would be, they were ready for the call. Still, despite their heart, the men were down, tired, sick, and feeling blue. To bring some cheer, the men were paid, so the men could do what men will do. 2 weeks into March, the regiment knew that to battle they soon would be. Admiral Farragut's mighty Union fleet steamed up the Mississippi, and the cannonade that thundered in the river thundered in their minds. To the action they would go and leave Carrollton behind. But 6 weeks went by. The men remained at Camp Parapet, anxious for the fight, chomping at the bit. As the 26th baked in the Louisiana camp, waiting for the call in the hot May sun, General Banks was making plans for an attack on Port Hudson. Franklin Gardner, a West Point grad, commanded the garrison. He had cast his lot with the South for a general's commission. For when Farragut's fleet passed back in March, they defied the mighty guns of this heavily fortified bend in the river with 7 warships making the run. Impatient with Banks' slowness, Farragut steamed up the river one day and tested the enemy's will. Much to his dismay, 4 ships were badly damaged and 1 was blown away, and the rebel gunners cheered. They were the victors that day, and the methodical Banks did finally conclude the inevitable course. Port Hudson was a formidable foe that could only be taken by force. He organized his armies of 30,000 men. Finally, they began to move north to surround Port Hudson. On May 20th, from Carrollton, the 26th Regiment went up the river on the steamer Crescent. 2 days later, and 80 miles to the north, to Baton Rouge they came, and marched to the front, nearing Port Hudson as thousands did the same. The regiments were all in place and ready for the fight. While they knew not when it all would start, it could very well be that night, for the Union guns had already commenced a cannonade, signaling the start of the longest siege in American history to this day. Nine months prior, a Confederate scouting party searched for a good location on the bluffs of Port Hudson, Louisiana, to place a fortification. They passed the plantation of William Slaughter, where cornfields glistened in the sun. As a Confederate officer noted the name, he remembered a field called Armageddon. He knew that if the Union came, lives would be forsaken. He said,
"It will be the field of slaughter yet, or I am much mistaken."
May 24, the regiment joined the Corps maneuvering around Port Hudson. By the end of the day, all were in place to begin the task of destruction. On the morning of the 27th, the regiment received the order to take their place in Dow's brigade, besides the field of slaughter. Colonel Kingsley readied the regiment with Colonel Joseph Selden, and captains and sergeants prepared the men for the task that lay before them. Also poised for the attack were soldiers from New Orleans, holding the extreme right of the Union lines. Important it was deemed, and Banks put his trust with these men of the Louisiana Native Guard, for these were men of color, and some doubted their will to fight. Led by the gallant Andre Caillou, these men ignored this slight and accepted the daunting challenge to hold the Union right, although one did remark, when assumed that he would flee from the fight, said,
If there is cowardice in my veins, the blood, it must be white.
It was afternoon when the order came to begin the main attack. Now the men knew where they were going. There was no turning back. They marched across Slaughter's field, the corn harvested long ago, replaced instead by fallen trees to make the going slow. Kingsley bravely led his men, shouting orders and encouragement to the men who followed him. Through Slaughter's field they went, and then, aghast, they could not grasp the horror of what they saw. A ball passed right through Kingsley's mouth and tore apart his jaw. So Colonel Selden took the charge and led the regiment ahead, stepping over fallen trees and men already dead. And Company K, the men from Groton, were led by Captain Randall. They marched forward through the field of death and watched their captain fall. Colonel Selden rushed to Randall's side in the din of the battle noise. Despite the shot deep in his leg, he said,
I'm all right, Colonel. Take care of my boys.
And then Company G marched into hell, led by John Stanton of Norwich. Certainly a brave man, but perhaps a bit too rash and reckless. Caught up in the excitement of the battle, he ventured ahead of his men and personally challenged the Southern troops to a fight right there and then. He called out to the rebel soldiers and waved his sword into the air.
"Come out of hiding, you cowards! We'll whip you fair and square!"
This audacious challenge was delivered in full view of the men that he led. Captain Stanton was killed instantly, a bullet through the head. Eventually the night did come and the regiment withdrew to the place they were at dawn's light, less more than a few. The morning came, a flag was raised, and the Union Army requested the collection of the wounded and dead, and the request, as custom, was granted, except to those men of color fallen from the Louisiana Regiment. For when trying to answer a dying call, a message was sent in that morning's light by the menacing ring of a sharpshooter's ball.
Take your wounded and your dead, but only if they are white.
Captain Randall was taken from Slaughter's field and placed in a hospital bed, but fever set in from the shot in his legs, and 2 weeks later he was dead. Banks considered the toll of the failed assault, but what a cost of human lives was it necessary for so many good men to be lost. Banks decided to intensify his siege of Port Hudson and hoped that it would render death and starvation to the fort with inevitable surrender. June 14th dawned a cannonade, raining death down on the fort. It lifted as the sun did shine off the waters of the port. The army, it was ready. The second assault loomed large. The regiments lined up as before, prepared for the charge. Company A lined in formation and marched into the fight when a shell exploded in their ranks. Oh, the horror of the sight! 4 men were instantly blown away, and the others terribly maimed. For those from Company A who survived, life would never be the same. The end result of the June assault was the same as the one before it. No ground gain, more lives lost. For what, God damn it? The siege continued on into July. Men lost on both sides. From wounds, diseases, these men did suffer, and many more did die. On July 5th in a Baton Rouge hospital, Lieutenant Irving